Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another crazy story time with Phil. And believe me when I say I've found up some crazy stories for you today, to the point where I almost can't believe they exist. So, the first story I'm going to tell you today comes from the 1600s, the early 1600s. And there was a man and a woman who loved each other very much, and one day a stork came along and brought them a baby. But it was a very naughty baby. It was a very, very naughty baby. She grew up and she said lots of naughty things, and she kept insulting the length of her father's pantaloons. And I don't know how many 17th century Spanish gentlemen you've met, but they don't like it when you insult the length of their pantaloons. So, there was this man and this woman, and they had their daughter, and as much as they loved her, they were a little bit sick of the wee brat, so they decided that they wanted to get rid of her. Now, the normal thing that you might do in this sort of circumstance is, I don't know, put them in a sack with a brick and throw them in a river. A river a bit like that, or if you're really inventive, a river like this. It's even more exciting now. But anyway, that's beside the point. In order to educate her, they decided to send her away to a nunnery, so that she could learn religious teachings and how to be a woman of religion, and hopefully that would stop her insulting everybody all the time. So that was their hope. They sent her off to a nunnery, because if you live in a nunnery, you do quite well, because not only do you get lots of free wine and free wafer biscuits, which is always lovely, you also get extra unemployment benefits, you see, because when you apply for them, when you go online into the Spanish internet of the 1600s, you go online and you say, what job do you have? And you say, none. And they say, oh, that's fantastic, you're entitled to some benefits then. So you get to have your nun wage, but you also get to have unemployment benefits. It's a fantastic job. She thought, okay, this is a good idea. I shall go off and I shall have lots of wine and wafer biscuits and long dresses, all given to me for free, and all I need to do is get on my knees an awful lot. This is a philosophy that has been adopted by some other women in modern society, but we'll gloss over that for the time being, and we'll keep in the 17th century rather. So, as you probably know, life is very random. It's all good stuff. Sometimes there's always some bad stuff that has to come with the good stuff. So, what was the bad stuff that comes with being a nun? Well, you don't get an awful lot of fun, you see. You're not allowed to partake in any sins, so you're not allowed to have any wild parties, you're not allowed to scream any profanities when you smash your foot into the bedpost when you get out of bed in the morning, like constantly happens to me. You'd think I'd learn where the accursed thing is by now, but never mind. You don't get to have any fun. But she liked having fun, so she thought, well, if I'm a bit sneaky, I can probably have some fun. So she decided to indulge in some sins of the flesh, which isn't cannibalism, it's a reference to sex. Anyway, she found this bloke and she really liked him, and she decided that they were going to have a secret love affair, and they had to keep it secret, you see, or else she would have been thrown out of the nunnery. Anyway, so they had to keep their love affair very secret, or else she would have been thrown out of the nunnery for having too much fun, because a nun, they're called a nun because they're supposed to have, how much fun do they have? None. That's how much fun they have, so that's why they're called that, and that's what she had to do. So they had to keep the affair very secret, and had to keep it under wraps. So they tried to do this, but they weren't very successful, and rumours started to fly. You see, rumours were going around that this lady was having too much fun, which was not allowed. The fun police were going to come round and get very upset at her. So anyway, the fun police were going to come round, but she decided she was going to prevent this by ending the love affair, and she was going to get it all sorted out. And the way she decided to do this was to get a relationship advice counsellor, who came up with the absolutely fantastically brilliant idea of this: eating her lover's excrement. Yes, this is real. This is why I genuinely almost cannot believe the story actually exists. No, she didn't come up with a mantra to say she kneeled before her bed every night and say something sensible like, I don't know, my husband's a load of poop, and used that to convince herself that he was a nasty, nasty man, and she shouldn't be getting hot and heavy with him under the dressing gowns. No, instead she decided to eat his leftovers, shall we describe them as such. So, I'm now going to say something, as much as that sentence may have surprised you quite a bit, I'm going to say something else that's probably going to surprise you. It didn't work! It was not successful. She was not able to cure her love for her man by eating his excrement. It didn't work, and this was a terrible, terrible tragedy. But you see, they had to stop the rumours somehow, and if they couldn't kill the love affair, maybe they could kill everyone else. Because you see, there's two solutions to having a problem. You can either kill the people who are going to endure the problem itself, i.e., the lovers, so they could kill themselves, or they could kill everyone else in the world. So this is the solution that they decided to adopt, you see. They decided to kill the locksmith, who had helped the husband get keys to the nunnery so that he could come in. No, not like that. So that he could enter the nunnery in order to meet his wife. You know what I meant. Get your head out of the gutter, honestly. They killed the locksmith, and they killed the relationship advice counsellor, not just for being an idiot, but for other reasons as well. And they went further. They had to kill another of the nuns in the nunnery, who'd been spreading the rumours by coming up with the extremely original excuse of she's gone off for a very long holiday that she didn't tell anybody about. Yes, that was their genuine excuse as to why the dead nun was no longer hanging around. Anyway, they kept killing and killing and killing, trying to kill everybody that knew anything about the rumours. They kept on killing and killing and killing in the hope of stopping these rumours, but it didn't quite work, and they ended up killing so many people that the government actually came and sent a load of special investigators in order to figure out what was going on with all of these dead nuns, and all of these dead locksmiths, and all of these dead everybody else that was hanging around. Because you see, the town was just littered with dead bodies, and as much as they probably thought it might have been a plague, it turns out it was actually just a poop-eating idiot and her husband. Anyway, so the private investigators came to the little Spanish town, and they discovered who it was. They discovered it had been the crazy nun and her crazy husband who had been murdering all of these people and really putting a real spoke in the wheel of the Spanish economy, with the death of all of their locksmiths. Because I don't know how much you know about the Spanish economy, but they are really prideful of their locksmiths. So, they sent them both to court, and the woman was sentenced to be put into solitary confinement for 15 years, I think, and the man was sentenced to death. But the man didn't turn up to court, so he was sentenced to death in his absence. They sentenced him to death in his absence, and they put a bounty on his head for him to be killed, and before somebody could kill him, he ended up killing himself. So eventually they came to the more sensible solution that if you want to get rid of rumours, you should kill yourself instead of killing other people. As a small side note, I should emphasise that using violence does not quell rumours particularly effectively, and I speak from experience. However, my attempt was not at murdering Spanish nuns, my attempts were involving a rhubarb pie, but that is a story for another day. So anyway, this nun was sentenced to live in solitary confinement for a very long time, and she lived in a tiny cell in a completely dark room for about 15 years, and then they decided, you know what, I think you've learnt your lesson, we will let you go. And they did. And she went off to a new nunnery to do prayers and the such like. Do you think she behaved herself at the new nunnery? Do you think she found another, even crazier lover? Do you think she started eating even weirder stuff? Do you think she murdered the nuns there? Well, unfortunately we don't know, because records of her disappeared at that point. We don't even know what time she died. Which is a bit of a shame, because I feel like this story would have had a perfect crescendo, but sadly, it never happened. And that's the story of the crazy excrement-eating nun. So, continuing in our vein, as would appear to be the theme this evening, of utter failure to solve problems, we turn instead to Germany, and a man who was not very attractive, and he wasn't very sociable, he wasn't very successful with the lovely young ladies of Germany. He wasn't very successful at all. So he decided that he wanted to solve this problem, which was perfectly reasonable. However, his response to how to solve the problem was not perfectly reasonable. He decided to read books about necromancy. He read lots and lots of books about necromancy. He read everything he could find about necromancy. And what did these books tell him, do you think? Do you think they told him to stand in a fairy ring of toadstools and sing songs to imps? Or dress up as some sort of a Robin Hood-looking elf character? No, it told him to go to a graveyard and dig up dead bodies and have sex with them. As you can probably imagine, this book was not written by an expert. This book was written by somebody who had probably had a wee too bit much of the old sacrificial wine. So, he was so convinced by this book that he decided to follow its advice. He went to many graveyards, dug up as many corpses as he could, and started enjoying their sweet and pleasant company in a rather intimate fashion. But it turned out he'd read the book wrong, because, surprise, surprise, his solution to the problem wasn't really working. So he decided to go back to the book and see if he'd read it wrong, and it transpired he had read it wrong. It turned out the corpse needed to be very fresh. So then he started breaking into a number of mortuaries and hospitals in order to steal freshly dead corpses. And he did. He did this quite a lot. And what a surprise, that didn't work either. So then, he decided, how do you get even fresher than a recently deceased body? Why don't you murder somebody? So he did. He found a couple who were having a nice time with each other, and he murdered them both. And then he took the lady's corpse and did it with her as well, even though she just finished doing it with her man. I genuinely feel slightly sick telling you this story, if I'm honest. It's just genuinely nuts. Anyway, so he continued to do this, and he continued to have a complete lack of success in his attempts to do this, until finally he was captured by police and murdered for his terrible, terrible crimes. Now you may be wondering, what's the crescendo to this story? What's the small, tiny detail that is very integral to this story that I have left out? Well, let's see. It's about necromancy and crazy people. What sort of detail could I be leaving out? Here's the detail I'm leaving out. This happened in 1972.
An energy crystal has been found.
Yes. 1972. 48 years ago. Not in the 1300s. Not thousands of years ago. 48 years ago. So, how should we continue this list of crazy occurrences about utter miserable failure? Well, I'm going to tell you about the utter miserable failure that is the Mongolian Navy. The Mongolian Navy is kind of famous. You may have heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway because it's too fantastic not to tell. As you may remember, there was once an empire called the Mongolian Empire, and it was a very, very big empire. It consisted of an awful lot of the Middle East, an awful lot of modern-day Russia, quite a bit of modern-day China, and obviously Mongolia. However, I can't quite remember what it was. Was it in the I want to say the 1300s. Don't quote me on the fact that it was 1300s. Roughly sometime around then, the Mongolian people, the people that the Mongolians had been conquering, decided they were a little bit cheesed off. So they decided to end the Mongolian Empire, and they kept pushing back their troops further and further until they reached what is current-day Mongolia.
An energy crystal has been
Which you may be familiar with Mongolia. If you imagine that Russia is there and China is there, Mongolia is right there in the middle. It's the most landlocked country in the world, with its borders being over 500 kilometers away from the nearest piece of ocean. So you may be wondering to yourself, why on earth does such a navy, why on earth does such a nation need a navy, you may be wondering to yourself. Well, that's a very, very legitimate question, because as it transpires, Mongolia is also not a nation that has a lot of lakes in it. As some nations are landlocked, but they still maintain a navy merely for the sake of looking after their very big lakes. However, Mongolia only really has one lake,
An energy crystal has
and
been
this
found.
lake isn't even on the border of their nation with any other nation. They have one lake on the sort of the upper right hand corner of it, which is relatively close, but still over 10 kilometers away from the Russian border. So they decided that they needed to have a navy in order to maintain this small puddle that they decided to call their own. But this was in the 1930s, and Mongolia was not the most prosperous nation in the universe at that time, so they needed a bit of help to get their navy going. So they went to the Soviet Union, and they said, "Hello, Mr. Soviet Union man, can we please have a navy to look after our puddle, our small mucky puddle that we're pretending is actually worth looking after? Can we please have a navy?" And the Russians, thinking, okay, here's an opportunity to get pally with one of our neighbours who'll help us with our whole communist takeover of the universe. They said, all right, we will help them. We will give them one boat. They gave the Mongolians, for their entire navy, one boat. A boat that is still maintained today. Was this boat outfitted with any cannons? No. Was it outfitted with any guns? No. What did it do then? It moved oil and a couple of other commodities from the north of the lake to the south of the lake. It was not a battleship. It was little more than a rowboat. But anyway, this boat, or at least some guise of it, still exists currently. To this day, 80, 90 years later, this boat still exists. It's manned by 7, the grand total of 7 troops, 6 of whom can't swim. I'm sorry, my brain cannot comprehend how ridiculous this story is. The Mongolian navy consists of one boat, 7 men, 6 of whom can't swim, and 1 of whom has never seen the ocean. And there are many hundreds of civilians who have had the pleasure of being carried across this lake by the entire Mongolian army, or the entire Mongolian navy, as this boat currently exists for the sole reason of moving tourists from one side to the other. They can't even kid themselves into believing they're moving weapons or special wartime materials. They move tourists and holiday makers in a boat.
An energy crystal has been found.
The thing that worries me more than anything else is that only 1 of them can swim. Which tells me that if one of these tourists were to fall out of the boat, who exactly would go to rescue them? Suppose he's driving the boat. Suppose the only Mongolian naviesman who can actually swim is the man driving the boat. What do they do then? Do they let the tourist drown? I don't know. But that is the current state of the Mongolian navy. 1 boat, 7 men, 16.6% of which haven't seen the sea. And only 1 of them. I don't have the words. I honestly do not have the words to express this. I couldn't believe this story existed when I found it, but no, there was even a documentary made about it. They made an entire documentary about... To be honest, that's probably the most thorough documentary of any navy. If you tried to do a documentary about the British Navy, for example, or the American Navy, or the Russian Navy, it would take an awful long time, because there's so much history. You know, we went to all 4 corners of the earth. We built an entire empire off our navy. We enslaved millions of people. We crushed democracies, and we stole diamonds from everywhere that we could find them. The Mongolians move a few tourists around. That is the story of the Mongolian navy. And as one final little crescendo to this collection of stories about wonderful historical failures, I would like to tell you about the man who invented or designed rather, the current US flag. Yes, the good old Stars and Stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner. He was, you might imagine, some sort of a big, brainy, revolutionary type, perhaps, just fresh out of the Civil War, something like that, and he was a big parliamentarian. I don't know, maybe he wore a big hat and probably had an impressive beard. No, he was a teenager in school. The current US flag was designed by
An energy crystal has been found.
by a teenager for an art project, and he got a B-. The world's most powerful nation got a B- for its flag. So if anybody ever tells you that B grades aren't good enough, just know that they're good enough for every flagpole in the United States. Thank you and good night.